So we are halfway through telling the greatest story ever told. It is a cosmic tale which takes us from the beginnings of humanity right through to our end. And that's our focus this week in this second part of the story of the prodigal son, our end. Each one of us, what will our end be? What will it look like? And so the end of the story, of this story, deals with the realities of heaven and of hell. We might have lots of questions about heaven and hell. What is the difference between heaven and hell? Will everyone end up in heaven? What about people who choose hell? What even is hell? What is it like? And why is it important that we repent like the prodigal son? Our story began with two sons. The younger, wishing his father dead, asks for his share of the father. And he takes it far away, spending it, wasting his life, and finding himself in a deep depression. He realizes that his life away from the father is not good. And so he changes, he repents, and he confesses his sin. But before the son could even make it home, the father runs out to meet him. He's been looking for him. He embraces him and he restores him to his original place in the family. And what we see is that this restoring of relationship requires a sacrifice. Verse 23. The father says, "Bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. There is a meal that brings the son back into the family. And it's a meal that requires a sacrifice. What is a sacrifice? If we cast our minds back to a fair few weeks ago now, well before Christmas, back to our dictionary, we'll remember that sacrifice is not about something dying, but rather about something being given and consumed, usually eaten. Sacrifice isn't about substitution or swapping places. It's about hospitality, the giving of something costly, the sharing of a meal. And that's what we have here. The father showing hospitality to the son, and the son gladly receiving it. This is what worship is. This is the worship meal. The son repents and is redeemed into the father's house, and there is worship in heaven, with all of the father's servants, all the angels, celebrating and rejoicing. And so this really brings us to the understanding of salvation. Often salvation is thought about like a court scene. There is a judge, there has been a crime committed, and someone has to pay. God has been offended, and so he must be appeased, or at least his sense of justice must be appeased. The problem with this idea is that it requires God to change his disposition from angry to love. But the good news is that Christianity is not about trying to appease an angry God, but about returning to a loving God. Isn't that good news? You see, it is not God who needs therapy. It is not God who needs to be changed. Salvation isn't about calming his anger, calm down, dear, and changing his mind. It's not about trying to get him to love us. He already does love us. God is love. It's us who needs therapy. It's us who needs to change and be changed. Now, perhaps some of us are thinking, but I thought that's exactly what salvation was. Changing God's attitude towards me. So often we think that salvation is, I've done bad things, God doesn't like it, and so he's angry with me, and so there needs to be punishment and repayment, but I can't repay it, and so Jesus kind of takes the punishment and pays the bill, and because someone has taken the punishment and pays the bill, God can kind of pretend that everything's good between us, and so now he's changed and he's happy with me now. Wonderfully, that isn't the gospel. God is not a God who demands to be satisfied. He's not a God who needs to be changed. And so if salvation isn't about appeasing an angry God, what is it about then? And what was Jesus' sacrifice all about then? Well, what does this story that the Lord God tells us tell us about sacrifice? It tells us that sacrifice is not about punishment, but about showing love. The Father's sacrificial meal shows how much he loves his Son. You see, all relationship is sacrificial. Any real relationship requires sacrifice. We said last week, didn't we, that sin is the breaking of relationship with God, right? And salvation is about restoring that relationship with God. And so that restoring of relationship requires sacrifice. You can just imagine an alternate ending, an alternate version of this story. The father might have run out to the son and said, look, I would love to take you home, but someone has to pay the credit card bill first. Or, I would love to take you home, but I can't have people thinking that I can just let this sort of thing slide. There's going to have to be some sort of punishment. Or, I'm just so full of anger, I cannot think straight, I need to kill something to calm down. That isn't the story, is it? That's not the gospel sacrifice, right? The sacrifice is that he doesn't get paid back. The sacrifice is that he doesn't get appeased. It isn't just, and it isn't fair. That's the sacrifice. In fact, when the son comes home, not only does the father not require the bill to be paid, but he even gives the son more as he slaughters the fattened calf. God takes all the shame, all the loss, and he takes all of the relational pain in our relationship together. Salvation is all about bringing the son from the pig pen back into right relationship with the Father. And wherever there is right relationship, there is sacrifice. And we all know this. Anyone who has been married or raised children or been in any kind of deep and profound relationship with another person knows that it requires sacrifice. Good relationships don't just happen. And they definitely don't happen without it costing you something. Whether it be time and effort, self-sacrifice, humility. For me to be here with you today has cost me something. For you to come today has cost you something. Relationship involves sacrifice. And nowhere is that seen so clearly and so powerfully than in the sacrifice God made to have a relationship with us, the sacrifice of the cross. This is the nature of salvation, the restoring of relationship with God at his expense. It costs us nothing. We are simply welcomed home by the God who loves us. And this great celebration that is held, this great feast, it tells us all that we need to know about the kingdom of heaven. There is joy There is the welcoming of the lost. There is rejoicing over the sinner who repents. And there is love. It's a happy scene. And we might think, well, this will be the end of the story. Surely that happy ever after. We've seen the fall and return of the Son, and now he enters into the eternal feast of heaven. What a great way to end the tale. But the story doesn't end there. It moves on to the second son. And this part of the story tells us about the nature of hell. You see, the older son comes in from his work in the field, and he hears the noise of the celebration coming from the house, and he asks the passing servant, what's going on in there? And they tell him, they say, your brother has returned, and your father's killed the fattened calf. And the older son he's just livid. He's just livid, and he refuses to be part of the celebration. He refuses to be part of the worship meal. And so once again, what's the father do? He comes out to the second son, just as he came out to the first son. And again, he humbles himself and acts in a sacrificial way. He begs his son, please, come into the feast. And the son, he just launches into his father. Listen, you know this son of yours. He says, this son of yours, he doesn't call him his brother, this son of yours, who you gave half the inheritance to, who squandered it with evil living, this son of yours, you welcome him back and you give him a big party. You never gave me a party like that with my select friends. Notice, the son doesn't want the father. And the son doesn't want who the father wants at the party, at his party. He just wants him and the people he approves of, his friends. Where is this son's focus? Well, it's not actually love for his father. It's not even obedience to his father. His main focus isn't even on his brother. His main focus is on me, himself. Look what I have done. Look what I want and I never received. We hear in his voice not just anger but rage towards the father. And here we begin to see what sort of father he would be and what sort of God he would believe in. You see, the older son doesn't believe in grace or forgiveness. He does not believe in love or sacrifice. He thinks his father should hold his younger brother in disdain. He thinks he should make him squirm and struggle and work. He doesn't think he should be welcomed in without some sort of justice. He has a penal, a punishment-based view of salvation where someone needs to pay. There needs to be punishment. He can't just waltz in here. He thinks that God should be angry. I remember, it's a long time ago now, but I remember reading a sermon by the Puritan preacher Jonathan Edwards. And the title of his sermon was Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. And I remember reading this sermon and just feeling so deeply uncomfortable. I didn't like it. I didn't like what he said. But lots of people around me were telling me how great Jonathan Edwards was. In fact, if I remember rightly, he's like John Piper's favourite theologian. But this is what Jonathan Edwards said in that sermon. He said, God holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire. He abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours. It's awful. To Jonathan Edwards and to many of the Puritans, God's default position towards sinners is anger, hatred even, certainly not love. Even the late, great R.C. Sproul, a more brilliant man, a more brilliant mind perhaps, than I could ever be, Just this week I was reminded of a clip of him saying, he says this, if we talk about the love of God and talk about it universally, that's blasphemy. Because God does not love the whole world. I trust now he understands the folly of those words and how they cannot possibly be true. For so many religions and far too many Christians, God just holds us over hell with a real disdain for who we are, just waiting to be appeased, waiting to be satisfied, and then he'll pull us back. He does not love us, and in fact he abhors us. This is not the God of the Bible. This is the God of the second Son. Wonderfully, that is not our God. That is not the God of the Bible. That is not the God of the cross. That is not the God of the incarnation. And it's not the God of the church. We are sinners. We're not in the hands of an angry God. We're in the hands of a loving God. The older brother believed in some distorted view of justice. He says, I've worked for you all these years and you've never done this for me. And his father says, you're my son. Everything I have is yours. I'm happy to give you everything. But the son won't hear it because he thinks that God should be like him. He thinks God should be angry. If we ever love the story of the prodigal son, it's because we see ourselves in the younger son. We acknowledge that we've messed up, we've sinned, we've broken a relationship with God, we haven't wanted the right thing from him, and so we are so glad that all we had to do was take one step towards him, and he's rushed out to meet us. We love that. But we need to be careful that we don't get back to the house and become like the older son. When it comes to our forgiveness, praise Jesus for his grace, hallelujah. And when someone else comes in, we're like, surely there's a line. Yeah? And we question whether they really ought to be forgiven that sin. And there's an even greater danger when the person who's been forgiven and brought into the church is the person who sinned against us. It's amazing how far we believe grace should go for us and how woefully short we believe it should go for others. And for that all we can say is, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. The older son does not know his father. For all that he stayed close to the father, he never actually got to know him. The truth is, he lived further away from his father than the prodigal ever went. And so the father gently says to his son, your brother was dead, and now he's alive. Can you not find any joy in that? Will you not come in? And the question I have for you is this. What do you think? Without looking at the Bible, we've read it, I know, but what do you think? Did the older son come into the feast? Or did he stay outside? The fact is, the story doesn't tell us. Jesus doesn't tell us. The story simply closes with the Father's invitation. Jesus leaves it an open question because it is the question for you and for me. Will you come into the feast? Or will you remain outside, angry, unforgiving, bitter? It's an important question because if we remain outside, it is what the Bible will call hell. It will be hell for us. But if we go in, we will have to go in with love and gratitude and thanksgiving that our brother is alive. Because although the father welcomes the older son in, there is one thing he will not permit. He will not permit the older son to come in and say, fine, I'll come into your crummy feast, but I'm not going to be happy that he's here. I'll pout and be miserable and angry during the whole feast, and I'll bring everyone down. I'll come in, but I'm bringing hell in with me. The father says, you may not do that. You may not do that. And we might even think, well, how is that even possible? Because hell's a place, right? How could he ever bring hell into heaven? We see hell isn't what people often think it is. Hell is not some fiery inferno. It's not a torture chamber being poked and prodded by devils. Hell is loneliness. Hell is being left to your own bitterness, shame, and sadness. You see, heaven, and indeed Christianity, is not about just you and God. That's what the older son thought. For him, the idea of heaven was just having the people he wanted around, his friends. When talking to the father, the older son calls the prodigal son your son. He's not my brother, nothing to do with me. That sounds like heaven to him. Not having to deal with other people's mess, other people's failings, not having a relationship with people who have let him down, not having to forgive. I wonder how often we can be like that or feel like that. Because the message of the world is, isn't it? If someone hurts you, cut them out. If someone offends you, cancel them. If you fall out with someone, whatever, don't worry about trying to build that bridge back. But do you know what? That is literally the way to hell. That is hell. The world tells us it's heaven. Not having to deal with people who upset and offend us, but it is the way to hell. C.S. Lewis wrote a wonderful short story called The Great Divorce. It's a reflection on the nature of heaven and hell, and I highly recommend it to you. But in that, hell is portrayed in this brilliantly biblical way. Everyone is in their own houses. And they're spread, literally each house is like miles apart, like thousands upon millions of miles apart. There's like no streets, there's no community spaces. Everyone has what they need, and therefore they don't need anyone else. Whenever there's a falling out, the person simply moves away and builds their house further away. It's an image of constant disagreeing and falling out, of pushing away and of growing isolation. We think that pushing everyone away who offends us will bring us joy and relief. But it doesn't. It brings sorrow and torment. You see, if you push everyone away until you are left only with people who never disagree with you, never upset you, never offend you, never let you down, you will be left with only yourself. And what you will find, given enough time, after some time of eternity, you will realize that you do all those things to yourself as well. In fact, you will find that you were your own worst enemy all along, and that other people were only revealing what's inside of you. Everyone in hell is alone. That is what hell is. Hell is sometimes spoken of by people as, as if it would be like one big party, and, all the people who knew how to have fun in this life, knew how to let their hair down and break the rules, all getting together and having a wild time. But it's not. Hell is loneliness, bitterness, and regret. Throughout the Bible, heaven is described as a gathering, a family, people together around Jesus. Hell is the opposite of this. Hell is never described as a gathering. It is described as being outside of everything. It's described as being alone. It is the place where you grind your teeth with insanity. Some of us might be tempted to think that eternity alone sounds kind of idyllic. It's not. It's not. Yes, a moment of peace in the middle of a busy week could feel like heaven. Like, oh, this is amazing. But loneliness for eternity is quite something else. I mean, we even have scientific studies, don't we, of people being in isolation just for a few months going crazy. Never mind an eternity of ever increasing isolation. And so the father corrects his son, and he says to him, not just my son, he's your brother. The father says, you are invited in, but you must be joyful that your brother is alive. Because that's what my house is about. That is how you enjoy life. Hell is an ever-increasing isolation. We push people away, and heaven is an ever-increasing relationship. As we embrace not just Jesus, not just me and Jesus, but as we embrace each other and one another. Heaven is joy at seeing other people's forgiveness. Heaven is rejoicing that others are with you, with Jesus. Heaven is not about just rejoicing in your own salvation and I got off scot-free, but rejoicing in the salvation of others. Which is why it is so important we practice this now. Because there will be people who call themselves Christians who will find themselves shut out on that great and terrible day. Who, like the son, like the older son will say, but I was here. I had faith. I believed in you. I said the prayer. Why are you letting them in after what they did and not me? That's why we must learn to forgive and be humble and not judge others. It's why Jesus says in Matthew 6, if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. If we can't forgive others, if we keep pushing people away, breaking ties with people, seeing others' sins as worse than ours, we will find ourselves shut out. We will not enter into forgiveness. You see, there are people who say they want heaven. They say they want Jesus. But just like the older son, they say that because they don't really understand what heaven is and who Jesus is. They don't actually want heaven, they want their version of heaven, where they are at the centre. And when that day comes, they will find out that, and when they find out that heaven is radically different to what they thought, do you know what? They won't even want to come in. I think we sometimes have this idea that when people see Jesus' throne on that final day, there'll be like people changing their minds. And hell will just be full of people who now want heaven but can't have it. That's not how it will be. There will not be people in hell who want heaven. There will be people in hell who want their version of heaven. But there will not be people in hell who want Jesus. They will hate Jesus' heaven, because to enter it you need to be humble. To enter it you need to love him, and to enter it you need to love others. And that's why I worry now, today, for people who profess to be Christians but don't want to be humble, who don't want to learn and submit, who judge others and who don't want to forgive others, who don't want to go to church and don't want to be around church people, who don't give their money and don't give to people in need and don't want to learn how to be patient and don't want to learn how to fast and deny themselves. Because we don't find these things easy. It's why Jesus said, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And so we must devote ourselves, our lives, to learning these ways of Jesus. We need to spend our lives in prayer and fasting, learning to participate in Jesus' life, learning to love other people, forgive other people, not judge other people, rejoicing in the repentance of others, and being generous to all around us. Training ourselves to want the real heaven that Jesus is offering us, not just wanting some heaven of our own imagination. We began this parable last week by thinking about icons, what it means to be an image, and that we have been made to be in the image of God. But too often what we do is we make God into an image of us. That is what the older son did. He believed the father to be like him, angry, unforgiving, vindictive. I wonder if we've ever done the same thing. The world we live in today is so totally non-religious, and yet it is completely moralistic. If you are not doing the right thing, you will be cancelled overnight, cast out into the outer darkness. And not just on that kind of, media level, but we've become this way in our own lives. If you offend me, or if you call me out, or if you gossip about me, whatever it may be, we're done. I don't need that kind of thing in my life. And then because we're like that, we cast God in our image. And we think that he must be like that too. But this story that Jesus told brings us such great relief. God, it turns out, is nothing like us. He loves us where no one else could. And just because we might struggle to love or forgive, wonderfully, Jesus does not. It is such good news that we may even ask ourselves, could there really be a God who is like this? A God who will not settle for our broken, twisted lives in the pig pen, but who calls us back into the splendor and glory of what he created us to be, who meets us in our mess, forgives us all our sins, and loves us completely. Today, as he says to the Son, God says to you, all that is mine is yours. All that is mine, all that I am is yours. And the question is, what will you receive from him? God is just waiting to pour his love out on you. Are we going to be changed into the image of God? Or are we going to insist that God be like us? No, let us learn to be like him. Loving, accepting, forgiving. He's not some tyrant who lays down demands. He does not demand satisfaction. He's not a reluctant God. He's not withholding. He's not judgmental. He loves you, and he invites you into his life. Humble yourself and enter into the life everlasting. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.